It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. I'm really excited about today's show. We have Crash Barry. Now, you can find him at crashbarry.com. Also, too, you can find him on Twitter at crash_Barry. He also has a Patreon that I want everybody to go to and support, the Crash Barry Patreon. A podcaster, investigative journalist, several different podcasts. The Crash Program is one podcast. Disinfomaniacs pod. He has a couple of buddies. He does that with Andy O'Brien and Nathan Bernard. Tough Island, Maine. And another one, Devils and Dirtbags. He did this whole investigation on the corruption in the Catholic Church. Actually did a little undercover manipulation there. My man, Crash Barry. Mr. Crash Barry, are you there?
I am.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
For anybody who hasn't heard of Crash Barry, tell the audience, who is Crash Barry?
Well, Ed, I'm an investigative journalist. I live in the foothills of western Maine on a little 20-acre farm. I have been looking at the seamy side of life in Maine for the last 30 years, for like print, radio. And I have these podcasts that are really over the top. I always find these very bizarre stories, and the saddest one is Devils and Dirtbags, season 1 of my podcast, which investigates a murder that occurred when I was a young man, when I was 4 years old in Springfield, Massachusetts, by a Catholic priest who murdered an altar boy. And then the cover-up, and then the whole scandal of the Catholic priests in Springfield, Massachusetts. 5 of my priests were child molesters. Luckily, I was never molested, but I was able to track the living ones down, and I got one of them. I tracked him down, and he's like an old man, and I got into his apartment building and got him drunk and got him to confess his sins and crimes, and I got it all on tape because it's a podcast, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that your listeners, especially those that dig true crime and want to know more about the corruption in the Catholic Church, will like Devils and Dirtbags. But what we're talking about today, Disinfomaniacs, yeah, that's my podcast with my buddies Andy and Nathan, and we just published the latest episode yesterday of Disinfomaniacs, episode 8, which is about the curse of Boneface. Curse of Boneface, and that's why you wanted me to come on and talk to you and your gang, because crazy story.
Yeah, it really is. I noticed these Nazis, right? I noticed these Nazis on. I was live streaming them on YouTube. And let me tell you what my take on this, and then you straighten me out. You straighten me out.
Yeah.
So I'm watching these Nazis, and right away, because I'm from New York City, I told you off there a little bit. I was with the Lower East Side activists, and we used to fight the Nazis all the time back in protests back in the 70s and 80s. And I'm watching these Nazis. They're all well-dressed. They all got brand-new masks. They all got brand-new T-shirts, got brand-new flags. There's no counter-protest, so they didn't have to promote this event. They all knew each other in advance. They were all close-knit. They were able to put up a pretty big turnout, about 50 guys, right? Well-dressed, clean Nazis. You don't often see that when you see these Klan guys and Nazis. A lot of meth guys, you know? I didn't see much of that. Well-dressed Nazis. And they're being live-streamed by some guy on YouTube. And I don't know this guy. But I see at the end of the march, they tell him, okay, that's it. Stop following us. And he says, okay, I'll stop following you, which was odd to me, too. They're going to their staging area with their buses, whatever. They don't want to be followed. During the march, they see Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer shows up. Just by coincidence. It just happened. Yeah. Remember that scene in The Falcon and the Snowman? The CIA agent from the embassy just happens to be driving by. Right. Laura Loomer just happened to be driving by. Well, that happens all the time, right? Then it turns out that this fellow Boneface, you can't miss him. Tattooed face guy, and the porn star buddy in front of him with the beard and the leather vest, and the chain, right out of Central Casting, right? And it turns out that Laura Loomer is saying that this Boneface was photographed with the QAnon shaman on January 6th. Now, I just had the QAnon shaman on the show a couple of days before. He's going along with Laura on Twitter. Oh, Laura Loomer's a great investigator. But when I contact him privately, he says, oh, Ed, that's not the guy I was photographed with. That's not the guy the FBI contacted me about. So I don't know what's going on. We got Crash Barry.
Oh, boy.
That's where I'm coming in. I'll call you Boneface. That's what Crash Barry. That's where I'm coming in. Straighten me out.
Yeah, okay. Well, you touched on a couple things there, but I am going to give you let's just call it this, a crash course in Boneface and his posse. There's all sorts of weird names in this one, okay? We got Boneface, who will go on great detail in a second, but he's the guy who claimed to be a freedom fighter in Ukraine, covered in tattoos on his head, skull, neck, Florida man. Literally, like, hashtag Florida man. Okay, we'll talk more about his criminal history in a second. So you got Boneface, and sometimes I slip up, Ed, and call him Bonehead. So that's not. It's just it's Boneface. Okay, and then Kevin McClellan. I'm sorry. We'll go back and talk more about Boneface more. But then we have Hammer. Okay, and there's no Boneface without Hammer. And there's another guy who's you'll hear about in a second called Handsome Truth. Okay, I'm not making this up. We got Boneface, Hammer, Handsome Truth. Okay, but the whole story revolves around Hammer, who's the guy that you said was like a porn star. The guy, right? He's got a beard that covers his facial tattoo right now. That on the right side of his face is it's in runes. Kind of like hieroglyphics for Norse pagan, because he's a pagan. Hammer's a pagan. He's a esoteric Hitlerist. He worships Wotan and Odin, right?
Yeah.
And he thinks that Hitler is a reincarnation of Odin. Okay, this is where that guy's coming from.
Yeah, real quick.
Yeah?
Shaman has those same tattoos, on his body, and he kind of played it down when I had him on the phone when I interviewed him. But and it's the same ones as Christchurch shooter. He's the one that is right. Yeah, that's.
Well, it matters which way they're positioned.
Oh.
It totally it's a message. Okay, so there's like an alphabet, and the way you spell it. Arguably, it's all fake anyways, right? Because this is just some modern reinterpretation of something, and who knows how much it's been watered down. So, but I know he identifies as, this kind of like Norse, a descendant of the Norse gods. And he's also very, bald. He's bald. He has a shaved head, and he's got swastika tattoos on his body because, get this, he's a tattoo artist, okay? And he's a Nazi tattoo artist who happens to live in Maine, Ed. That's why I'm on him, okay? That's why I've been watching him, and that's why I know way too much about this dude, because we don't want Nazis in Maine, okay?
Well, then real quick, Crash, how was he able to organize this big rally in Florida if he's from Maine?
Right. Well, Handsome Truth, the third guy in this, threesome from hell, is part of the Goyim Defense League, and that's a Florida group of Nazis who are just really – all these people are jerks, right? They're all jerks. And Handsome Truth's guys are just go up to people at stoplights, if it's a person of color or a woman or – someone that, they view as a minority, and they'll just go crazy on them, just crazy. They'll be really mean. There are these guys that do these protests. It's okay to keep Florida white, keep Maine white, whatever. They do these overpass things. And so there was a combination of Handsome Truth gang called the Goyim Defense League. And Hammer, the dude from Maine, has something called the Blood Tribe. And Hammer's like the leader of that. It's a cult. It's literally a Nazi cult, all right? So you got this Nazi cult leader who's not from Maine, okay? He just moved here a couple years ago. He bought cheap land up north, and it's real scrub brush, no good. Picked over lumber land, right? And he comes up, and he's got this idea because he can buy 10 acres for like $25,000 of scrubland. And he's going to make this little like tiny house compound for Nazis to come to. But meanwhile, they go out and they do their activism in more crowded places. So he came to Maine. There was a little hubbub when he was discovered that he had bought a piece of land in Maine. Nobody did anything about it. But me and my buddies keep an eye on all these guys, right? Because there's a lot of people in these movements. And they're very public in weird ways on social media, blah, 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 right? So we watch them. And mostly on Telegram, which is a messaging app that is preferred by a lot of extremists because it's a secure app owned by a Russian dude. But anyways, so we're watching Hammer, and then suddenly he leaves Maine, because he'd been kind of like run out by the FBI because they were going around asking neighbors, what do you think about this Nazi living here? So he decided the pressure was on. He was just going to leave Maine for a little while. And he goes down on the road to like do Nazi tattoos, okay, which are illegal, obviously. He's not a legal tattoo artist.
Let me stop you for a second, because you see people like General Flynn and these other right-wing Nazi types, and they say, well, we don't recognize any of these guys. They're not with us because we don't recognize them. And they're trying to say these guys are feds because they're not their buddies, and they should know all the Nazi racist.
Right.
You know what I mean, man?
Right. Well, this gang, the Blood Tribe in Goyim Defense, they don't care about General Flynn's guys. Who these guys are targeting are the people in Patriot Front and Proud Boys who find that Patriot Front and Proud Boys aren't extreme enough for them. Right. So they're welcomed into the Blood Tribe and into the Goyim Defense League. So these are the hardcore. These are ones that make General Flynn look like a liberal, and I can't even believe I'm saying that, right? But these guys are hardcore neo-Nazis who worship Hitler, who are just literally, they're the scum of the earth, despicable people. And, I mean, if they weren't so despicable, it'd be kind of funny because all the nicknames and all the stupid things. They have, like, blood rituals. You can see all that on my Twitter. If you go to my Twitter, you'll see videos of these blood rituals they do.
Yeah, Crash_Barry. Crash_Barry. And Crash, now, you don't think these guys are feds? You don't think they're COINTELPRO undercover?
Oh, not a chance in the world. We've been covering this, my buddies and I, really in depth. We've already done 4 episodes of Disinfomaniacs on it. Which means almost like 6 hours of reporting. We're not like just sitting around talking. Yeah. We do actual reporting, investigations of guys like this. And here's the thing. There's not a chance in the world the feds would be associated with him. And I know, and I'm not like, the feds are, not interested in infiltrating. Of course they are, but they're not the leaders of it. You know what I'm saying? Hammer is a whack job, lost cause. There may be used as what we call, I'm sure you're familiar with the term, the honeypot, sure. Right? Where Hammer brings out people from the woodwork. That might be some feds in there. I have a couple theories about a couple of his members of his gang that I watched some video of that I'm like, that guy seems kind of fed, only because he seems a little bit smarter than the rest, Ed. Right? There's one that's like, he does something smart, and as soon as he did it, I'm like, fed, right? And I thought about it. It's like, there's no way a Nazi would be that smart. It was to avoid pain. So I'm like, it must be a fed. But anyways, these guys are all dirtbags. They're all really freaky. They're into Hitler. And back in July, they announced they were going to have this top secret march in Florida, the one that you saw on September 2nd. And they weren't going to announce the date or time because they didn't want a repeat of Charlottesville, right? They want to keep the counter-protest away, because those of us that remember Unite the Right in Charlottesville in 2016, they were vastly outnumbered by, anti-fascists. Blown away by the number of...
Exactly.
And turned out to be a tragedy. Yeah. So they have to keep that secret. They have to keep it secret. And they had what they call a vetting bot, right? And then you have to be vetted by a human. And there's all this other stuff. So they were initially talking, Handsome, Truth, and Hammer were bragging, we're going to have 150 Nazis march under the swastika. And you mentioned about like the brand new flags and the uniforms. Well, guess what? It's a grift, right? Of course, because Hammer sells all the merch. Gotcha. Okay? So he's selling the red shirts that they all have to wear. He's selling some of them. I don't want to make a blanket statement there. He mandated what shade, like what Pantone color red the shirts had to be. But because there were a couple little different groups involved, he allowed them the ability to, have their own logo on it. But the ones that said Blood Tribe have the symbol on it, that was his merchandise. And they're long sleeves because he wanted them to wear long sleeves to cover up tattoos. But it's like Florida, right? Florida. It's like, so a bunch of guys wore short sleeves and shorts. So it's funny, you thought they were organized. To me, I'm a former Coast Guardsman. I fought the war on drugs and the war on Haitian refugees, right, back in the 1980s. All right, so as a young man, I was a sailor in the U.S. Coast Guard. So I've been to boot camp. I know how to march, Ed. Those guys didn't know how to march. so out of step. They were, maybe to a civilian,
I didn't even notice them marching, to be honest with you. I didn't notice the marching part.
If you saw the bulk of the march, you'd be like, what? Yeah. Right? It's like they don't have military bearing, which shows that not many of them are actual veterans. And so they drew from all over the United States. One guy spent $3,000 to get from California. There is a whole van load from the upper Midwest where they're holding another one in Wisconsin sometime in December. There's going to be another one of these marches. And so they drew from all over the place, right? And that's how they got their 55 guys. But they claimed there's going to be 150. They got 55. But as you point out, there's Boneface front and center, okay? And Boneface, really scary-looking dude. But if you look at him, he's kind of scrawny, and if you really see him from afar, you see he wears his suspenders down like the old skinheads used to do back in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. Because there were skinheads that were fascist, and then there are leftist skinheads. And so there's two different skinhead movements, but he was a skinhead. And I got to say, unfortunately, he's been on my radar for like 2 months. So I know way too much about this guy named Boneface, okay? It's like, so back to Hammer, the bald wannabe cult leader who has a place in Maine.
Porn star.
He porn star. Wannabe porn star, tattoo artist. He doesn't know anything about blood pathogens because of all the weird ceremonies they do with blood. But anyways, he totally wants to go to Ukraine to fight on behalf of the Ukrainians because I'm going to give the crash course on this, Ed. In the far, far right, there are three real camps. There's one that likes Ukraine because they believe Ukrainians are white nationalists, falsely, okay? And they believe that neo-Nazis are welcome, falsely. Okay, so that's one camp. The second camp of extreme far right likes Putin because they're identified with the Orthodox Christianity that's very similar to Russian Orthodox, and they just love Putin because they're a bunch of, cucks, right? So then you go back to that first group. They hate Putin because Putin supposedly incarcerated like 5,000 Nazis in Russia. So the first group, who's pro-Ukrainian, hates Putin because of his treatment of Nazis. Second group loves him, Putin, hates Ukraine. Third group hates the whole thing, says the war is rigged by the Jews to have whites on whites fight. Okay? So that's it in a nutshell. Hammer, the porn star, wants to go to Ukraine. He's an ex-Marine, had no experience in the wars. Okay? None. He was like stateside, and I think he was in Japan for 2 years. So no combat experience, but Hammer claims that he's leading a small group of like 4 to 8 dudes to go to Ukraine to battle on behalf of the Azov Brigade or alongside, which is like, not to go too deep in the weeds on the Ukrainian war, but like the Azov Battalion or the Azov Brigade has now been folded into the Ukrainian military, from my understanding. But for a little while, they were like a standalone militia, and then they were incorporated into the National Guard. There were some far-right extremists in that group at one point, but they've been purged. It's not what the Nazis here say it is. So Hammer wanted to go over there and do that, and all of a sudden, this guy Boneface appears on the scene in the neo-Nazi world who claims he had been fighting over in Ukraine, okay, and claimed he had all this experience in these battles and in this siege and all this, like war stories.
Yeah, there's pictures, and there's pictures of him holding a Ukrainian passport or citizenship, right?
Yeah. And that one's the best, because if you look at that, spoiler alert, folks, the dude's lying, okay? And there's a whole trial. They have a trial when this comes up. But at this point, remember, nobody knows. All these Nazis are so dumb, right? They believe this. But if you look at that passport photo real close, you'll see that his face, Bonehead's face, is superimposed on it so that the official stamp is actually under his photo. So then there's a blue circle that he put on in magic marker.
Oh, no.
He used blue Sharpie to complete the seal, right? It's like, meh. And then a lot of Photoshop documents, weird like selfies with him with alleged IDs identifying him as member of Azov Brigade, which were totally bogus. He made Photoshop versions of things when he Googled Azov Brigade ID.
Well, then,
those
Crash Barry, let me ask you this. Where in the world of Crash Barry, crashbarry.com, Crash_Barry, can people go to see these photos and the analysis of the Photoshops?
Well, on my Twitter is the best place.
There you go.
We have it there, but also there's been a great investigation by Bellingcat. It's an investigative group. They just did a story on it, and also Vice News did a piece. All of them have great details, but, I do the podcast with, Ed, I hate to say it, more details than you need to know, because this is a mind-boggling story, right? So Hammer believes these, seriously, man, it seemed like eighth grader with poor Photoshop skills, right? Or just really blatant forgeries was enough to convince these guys. And to me, Boneface is a scrawny little dude, no military experience. He's a felon. We know this. Multiple meth trafficking, meth use, meth possession. And he was also in 2012 arrested as part of a roundup of a neo-Nazi group in Florida swamps, and was actually snitched. Okay, so he's got a very easy to find history, and these guys are fooled by this fake ID that would look like something like a kid would make to be able to buy beer, right? And just okay, you guys are morons. They embrace him. They put him to the front, and they're like, here's Boneface. And Boneface just lie. But meanwhile, there are people out in the real world who are like, well, if he claimed he was airlifted out of that siege, only injured people were airlifted out of that siege. And also, Ed, you saw the pictures of him. He's covered in tattoos. You'd think people would remember the dude. His face is literally a tattoo, right? You're not going to forget Boneface's face.
Not even a nice tattoo. So, it's not even well done, yeah.
No, they're terrible. They're prison tattoos because guess what? He was in prison.
Wait, so Blood Tribe and the Goyim Defense League have no vetting process where they could do the basic kind of research, and they don't have any cops working for them. They don't have any PIs working for them where they can just do a simple search and see this guy's background.
Well, I know it's going to drive you crazy as a PI, but these guys are knuckleheads. They have a guy named Cracker who allegedly was the vetter, and in the last year, as I've been monitoring Hammer, he's always bragged about our vetting is the toughest thing, and okay, whatever. I'm not going to waste my time trying to infiltrate him, but I know there are people out there infiltrating him. But guess what? The one that infiltrated him successfully was a con man, right? He literally duped them into believing that he was a war veteran. Stolen Valor, that's a big deal for me, right? I hate Stolen Valor. They're great videos on YouTube of Stolen Valor. Guys dressed up in uniforms like their costumes, pretending to have been participating in important battles. And really, it's such a disservice to the veterans, right, who actually fought in these battles. Totally scummy move, right? They do it for attention. Well, here's Boneface. Not only is he doing Stolen Valor, he's doing Stolen Valor of Ukraine, right? A country he's never been to, has no connection to, and really is, turns out, fulfilling the narrative that Laura Loomer wanted.
I was going to say to you, but Crash Barry, you're trying to tell me that Laura Loomer got this wrong? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Hard to believe that Laura Loomer could be mad at, could be wrong about. Well, you know who else got it wrong? Alex Jones got it wrong. Roger Stone had Laura Loomer on to break this big news. Stu Peters talks about it. Even the Dilbert guy, I can never remember the Dilbert guy's name. Really? Scott Adams, right? Is that Dilbert? I think that's his name. Anyways, they all talked about this. They say it's they talk about that Boneface is a CIA operative,
right?
Because he did appear on. You know who he duped, but it's not very hard to dupe them. Is RT, Russia Today? RT is the propaganda unit of Putin, right? And they just want to put this narrative forth that Ukrainians are Nazis because that allows them to use the denazification. Part of the reasoning for the war is the denazification of Ukraine. Well, guess what? Ukraine, not Nazi, all right? They hate the Nazis. They've always hated the Nazis. Look back to World War II, right? So there's a whole kind of right-wing narrative, false narrative that Laura Loomer, and this is what the hardest thing is to believe, okay? Laura Loomer was getting her hair done.
Oh, is that what she says?
Okay. Yeah, she's getting her hair done, and she lives an hour from there. Okay, this is just north of Orlando, okay, this place where they're holding this march on this bridge.
Yeah.
And she spots them, right? And she's like, what the? She just got her hair done, and she shows up, and then they recognize her, and they have this whole back and forth, and then she just goes home and does like a deep dive on Boneface, and like totally falls for the line, hook, line, and sinker, Ed, like 101,000,000%. And so then
wait. Do you think she fell for it? Because even when they spot her and they're calling her Laura Jumer, that all seemed to be bad acting, like a porn movie.
Unfortunately, that's real.
Okay.
So what they did there, so there's a couple conspiracies. One is that she's actually a guy. Okay, well, we know that's not true. So that's why they call her Larry Jumer there. But secondly, they started yelling faggot, 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 chanting that on her. And that's a chant that Hammer admitted to in a later live stream that they stole from a gang called NSC 131, which is an active neo-Nazi group in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And that's their intimidation. They're like 25 to 30 guys wearing masks, and they will hold demonstrations at, let's say, the State House in Maine, or in front of motels that are providing lodging to refugees. Oh, and they'll do these keep Maine white or keep New Hampshire white. And unfortunately, when people confront them, that's their whole technique, is to yell at them.
Yeah, because Maine took in a bunch of Somalian refugees, right?
For
when I was up there,
for many years, we've taken refugees of all nationalities. Many. I mean, there's a Vietnamese community, there's a Cambodian community, there's a Sudanese community, there's all sorts of people from Africa here, and we lovingly welcome them. Good people lovingly welcome them because historically, Ed, over the centuries, refugees and immigration has saved Maine. Right? There's been many times when the mills needed workers, the farms needed workers, we needed railroads built. Who did it? Not the white man. Okay, sorry. I mean, the white man did some of it, but like there was, immigrant labor, refugees from war-torn nations. This is something that we should be doing. We should be embracing that, and then we get some diversity in Maine, because Maine is, unfortunately 95% white. That's why some of these Nazis feel comfortable, right? They're like, oh, look, we've already got the ethno-state. Just go to Maine, and I hate that. So that's why my colleagues and I and others speak out against these guys and keep an eye on them, because we want to make it so that they're unpopular, not popular.
I got you. But Crash Barry, back to Laura Loomer. Back to Laura Loomer.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the thing is, do you think she stumbled on this, or she was tipped off in advance? What do you think is going on with that whole situation?
I think she stumbled on it.
Oh, really?
And I think that she's not in the know with the right people in order to figure this out, because there was, some background on it that morning when the group was gathering. There was like some mix-ups. I heard about there is like plagued with a comedy of errors of Nazis trying to assemble 55 guys before March. And like they had chosen one place to go to, and then they decided at the last minute to go someplace else. And I think it was transportation, because you said, oh, maybe they're, the guys are trying to get in their vans. No, there wasn't any vans. There wasn't any U-Hauls like they have with Patriot Front. They were supposed to have those, but something fell through. So they were like in civilian cars. That's why they didn't want to be tailed, right? And then, so Laura Loomer, again, I could be wrong, but my instinct as someone who watches this stuff, totally lucked out. And if the hairdressing story isn't true, maybe she saw something on social media and recognized where they were at, because there could have been a live stream. Yeah,
there was a lapse. There was. You could have zipped over there in 40 minutes, or 35 or 40 minutes. You could have done that.
Right, but I don't think it was a tip. I don't think it was linked, because even though it furthers that narrative, like they never expected her to be there. You could see the genuine glee on these Nazis' faces when they realized it was her, right? Like, oh my God, I can't believe Laura Loomer's here. And they went nuts. So, and the video specifically, the dude known as Handsome Truth is being interviewed by a reporter, and one of the other guys goes, look who's here, and you see it in Handsome Truth's face, like almost disbelief, like, oh my goodness, what an opportunity for us, right? So I don't believe that's rigged. And then, the whole idea of like this being a CIA operation, Boneface going over to Ukraine, none of that passes. the basic open source intelligence gathering, let alone looking at it with any sort of seasoned investigative eye, right? It's just total malarkey.
Well, so then Crash Barry, what happened then? She went home and started Googling and just fell for, because he was calling her up too. Is that what happened?
Right. There's a little bit of stalking going on. Yeah. And so meanwhile, all right, let's set that. So after the rally, she goes home, right? Meanwhile, the Nazis had rented an Airbnb. They called it a mansion. There's a swimming pool. They had an after party. They all got drunk and did this weird blood ceremony. And I don't want to go into the graphic detail. It's not that it's graphic. It's that it just shows you how silly these guys are. It's like a LARPing, like a Blood Brothers sort of thing. They have the spear, and the spear is so dull they can't figure out how to draw blood. I'm watching I've watched I think I've seen 26 guys take the oath now, and every single time they're like sawing their hand on the spear. Instead of I'm like, don't they know any diabetics or watch Sopranos or something where you prick your finger? That's where the blood comes out.
Well, can't they sharpen the spear? At least sharpen the spear. It reminds me of that guy, Maurice Simonet from Blacks for Trump, who was arrested for trying to behead a guy with a dull machete.
Oh my goodness!
Sharpen the machete. Yeah, his cult that cult killed 13 people. That guy you see behind Trump holding up the sign that says
"Okay," I'm going to look into that. Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know that tale.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So these guys, I mean, come on, Blood Brothers, all this other stuff, and then they rub their blood into the shaft of the spear. It's this weird homoerotic thing, and oftentimes Hammer has to massage the blood out. Anyways, the night of that rally, Boneface took the oath to join the blood cult, and they put up a singular video of him doing it. It's 2 minutes long, and then there's a longer video, like a supercuts video, where they got 15 guys joining. So they put him up, and they put him up drunkenly on the Saturday night. Meanwhile, Boneface is suddenly going to be on the front page of every, the Rolling Stone has Hammer and Boneface, and this is getting a lot of media attention that there's this rally of the Nazis, right? So as these guys were partying and sleeping, all sorts of online investigators were taking a look at this and totally debunking it. And we'd already been, me and Mikey fellows already knew about it, and we'd seen some of the, obviously fraud stuff, but we hadn't gotten into great deep dive at that point. But as soon as we saw this thing going, we did. And I went back to the Telegram and I scraped, I took the video of Boneface taking the oath. The next morning, Hammer wakes up late and he's drunk or hungover, right? And he checks all his messages and he sees it's blown up overnight that Boneface is a fraud. Oh, no. And he's freaking out. So the first thing he does is deletes that video. Well, luckily I had already scraped it, Ed. So I'm the only one that has this video of Boneface taking the blood oath. Because later on, Hammer would deny that he was a member. And I'm like, too late, dude. You don't take the blood oath and you're not a member. So then Hammer acts crazy where he's instantly distanced himself and stabs Boneface in the back and says, no way, okay, people are just showing me this information. Boneface is a liar. He's out, all this other stuff. I'm like, well, actually, I was telling this to my colleagues. I'm like, that's kind of a leadership move. Don't give the obvious fraudster a chance to explain why he has Photoshop documents, right? We take no guff here. You pull some grief like that, you're gone. That's a leadership thing.
But it seems to me like even after that, Loomer was still running with this.
Oh, she totally was, because she's slow. She's very slow, right? And she was milking it. She's on Roger Stone. I mean, I'm sure she got more Twitter followers, and I'm sure she probably made I'm sure Elon Musk gave her $13 for all the bonus traffic she generated, right? So Loomer's running with this, but meanwhile, everywhere else it's imploding, right? But the far right bubble, right? That whole echo chamber, they just keep on amplifying Loomer's thing, and it's all over the place. And then RT does it, and then Alex Jones has it. Everybody's doing this stuff. But the reality is that the whole Boneface narrative is crumbling in real time. And then, so that's all Sunday. Hammer's this guy's no longer a member of the tribe. Monday morning, I go look at the Telegram again. He scrubbed all that. That's all gone. And then he says there's going to be that trial of Boneface. And then they live streamed it. So, later on that week, they had a live stream on Telegram,
oh, really?
and Odyssey, and BitChute of the trial of Boneface, and it was 2.5 hour long interrogation of Boneface. And at the beginning of it, it was obvious that from the first 10 minutes that this was totally bogus stuff. But then they had like a Ukrainian soldier who was fighting in Ukraine. I think he was Swedish, but he has a Ukrainian wife. So the wife like spoke to Boneface, and like it was jibber jabber. Like he was not actually speaking Ukrainian, and he had some forged documents that they looked real close at. Like one of them, it said like his Kent McClellan is his real name. Kent McClellan 3131 at comast.com. Right, like not even Comcast.
Oh,
like
no.
if you're gonna make up an email, come on, get the fake email address right. And then there are so many things that these guys are pointing out. But initially, the Blood Tribe Vetter and Cracker and Hammer were all like, "Oh, we got to give them a fair trial because I've seen this stuff." It's like by the end of the thing, they want to like hang them, right? So then they had part 2 of the trial. Like 4 days later, because they were going to have more experts or whatever. Like they needed like more expert testimony. Well, guess who didn't show up for that trial?
Mr. Boneface.
Yeah, Mr. Boneface. They call him Mr. Face.
Really? Oh, man.
So Boneface has this trick, and I'm not, an office worker. So when I explained this to a friend of mine who's an office worker, said, "Oh, this is a total like post-pandemic Zoom meeting trick. That whenever like a tough question comes up, you don't hit mute." Because everybody will know you're muted. You just like start mouthing like you're talking and nobody will hear you.
Oh, no.
And then you'll get like disconnected. So like whenever it was a tough question, like Boneface would get disconnected. And then they say, well, he's got a terrible Wi-Fi connection. He'll be back later. And and then when he reconnects, they'll like totally forget about the question they were going to ask him. So he just lied, denied everything. The second trial, part 2, was just like, everybody was just angry, right? All these Nazis were like, "Can't believe we were duped," and like, "Well, good thing we found out now," and all this. It was really, kind of like a gang, kind of gang up on Boneface, and it turns out it was revealed that since Boneface has been excommunicated because of the lying, that somehow revokes the oath that he took. Okay, so. I mean, I'm no lawyer here, but I've listened to the blood oath many times, and all you're doing is swearing allegiance to, and this is a quote, Ed, the bros. This is in it. The bros of the past and the bros of the future. Okay, and like blessed are those that keep the oath, cursed are those who break it. Well, there's nowhere in that oath that says you can't lie about your background, right? I don't feel like, I'm not trying to defend Boneface here, but if we're going to play by their rules of this court and this whole fake legal system of, the way they hold the trial, I'm like, I don't see that Boneface violated that oath. But Hammer says he violated the oath, and Hammer's the leader of the cult, so whatever Hammer says goes. And so then Hammer basically cursed him. Said there's a curse going to be on Boneface now, and sure enough, within 24 hours, a neo-Nazi group in Florida beat Boneface up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they beat him up. But then, flash forward to a couple days ago, this is breaking news. I haven't tweeted this yet. I'm going to tweet it later today or tomorrow, is Boneface confesses that it was all a lie.
Oh, no.
And, I've got exclusive video of that, exclusive for now. But so the whole thing comes crashing down. Where does this play in the whole like far right neo-Nazi thing? It's like many of the far right, either just extremists or actual other Nazis that aren't part of the Blood Tribe are looking at Hammer and his group as like jokes, right? Because like, how could you not figure this out? I mean, as you and I know, Ed, it's very simple to Google somebody. It's very simple to do a background check, like $5, whatever. So these guys are being made fun of, yet within the cult, they're just moving on. They're acting like it's no big deal. Hammer actually says that it's a bonus, right? That this was a bonus, that they were able to get rid of him before he did any real damage. I'm like, okay, yeah, before he does any real damage.
I tell you, Crash Barry, I'm a little disappointed. You tell this story. There's no lion tamers. There's no jugglers. There's no dancing bears. Trapeze, man. You leave out a lot, Mr. Crash Barry. Okay? There had to be more. CrashBarry.com.
They gotta go to the podcast. I can't do all 6 hours with you.
You gotta read the book. You gotta read the book.
Yeah. Right, though, I promised you that when we started this conversation, this is pretty nutty, right? I mean, and the sad thing is, it kind of takes attention away from the reality here, is that there are people like this out there. Don't try to sweep it under the rug that this is fake and that there's feds. There very well may be feds, but there are people like this out there. And I got to say, from the more and more of this work that I've been doing, and I've been a journalist for 30 years, but for the last 20, I've really been keeping an eye on it. And it used to be fringe, right? Like I was the weird reporter because I'm like
it's
going to this, right? And now I'm like, I told you guys. I said, we saw it, the demonization of the other. When we started seeing it first with gays and lesbians, and then, with refugees and immigrants, and now with trans folk, this is, Hitlerism, right? You're marginalizing folks, and you're making them the enemy. I can't tell you how much of that, the fear of the other I'm seeing in this realm, and we know that's fascism right there.
Oh,
yeah,
right? Absolutely. Now, what about these pictures of a fellow that they were identifying as Boneface next to the shaman on January 6th? Now,
yeah, that's news to me. I do
really?
not know that. I'll look into that. I know that he was not on January 6th. Okay. I know that he was never in Ukraine. It's highly unlikely that he's really been out of Florida. I mean, he may have made some trips on the continental United States. But he's a meth head who's been in and out of jail, and he's actually out on bail right now for like an assault charge. And, there's no – I think that would have come up in other research than Laura Loomer. Well, but I'll look into that, and if I find anything out, I will let you know.
Definitely, no, because real quick, because at first, Shaman was saying, look at it, this guy was in a picture with me, and the FBI questioned me about him, that guy in that picture, saying it was Boneface. And then Laura Loomer ran with that, saying, Angeli, Jake Angeli says it was him. We had a CIA asset in the Capitol on January. Now, you're convinced he wasn't in D.C. on January 6th.
Yeah, I feel like that would have been part of his humble brag, right? Like, we would have heard it from him. Like, look, I'm legit. I was there. I'm not sure 100%, and I will look into it, but my gut tells me I would have heard about this, right? And
at first, Shaman was promoting, saying Laura Loomer, they have to say she's wrong about this because she's right about everything. She's right about. They can't say she's right about this because then they have to say she's right about everything, including her crazy story about October 1st in Vegas, which is complete insanity.
Everything she says is questionable, right?
Nuts,
so when there may be a kernel of truth. There was a story in RT that said that Boneface was a CIA operative, but come on, that's an RT, right? So, like, yikes. That's all I can say, yikes, right? That this stuff spreads like wildfire. Yikes.
Well, it's interesting because when I want to have Shaman come back, he says, well, I don't know anything about that. That wasn't him. That wasn't the guy. But on Twitter, he was saying it was. So I guess he's backed away. But
wow, yeah, I'll look into that. That's that would be another level of complexity. Hey, you wanted more circus stuff, Ed. You asked for it.
That's the
Watch what you asked for, dude. Right?
That's the dancing bear coming in.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Crash Barry, _Barry. Follow this guy on Twitter, man. Great stuff here. CrashBarry.com. He's on Patreon again. Crash Barry. All these different podcasts he's got with different people. All seems to be really, really, really good content, man. Let me see if I have it pulled up. I don't think I do. Pull it up real quick. I'll stall here. Okay.
Well, when the book comes out, I'll come back on and talk about the book, about the priest, because this story about the Catholic priest is mind-boggling, and it's a microcosm, right? I'm looking at one very specific diocese, real close, one that I know everybody in. So I'm able to get really to the heart of what causes the scandal and just the hard, bitter truth that this was a cover-up, People want to forget that, but we can't. We can't forget that.
I know. That's a heartbreaking situation. And if you ever read the Pennsylvania grand jury report by those grand jurors, it's like a 400-page report. No, and by the way, too, everyone says, oh, and they pointed out all these priests and all that. There were not one single new arrest in that grand jury investigation.
Never.
And the grand jurors did a 20-page summary where they said, hey, listen, no one's going to read this whole freaking thing. Let's do a 20-page summary. And when you read that 20 pages, man, it's just heartbreaking, the lengths that these they were going to. There was like a full-time occupation for these guys targeting little boys. And was all they did all day long.
And they literally got away with murder, as I talked about in Devils and Dirtbags, that podcast. Literally got away with murder. The guy that murdered Danny Croto in 1972, a Catholic priest, went to his grave claiming that he was innocent. We know he wasn't. There's so much proof. The cops are covering up, the diocese, real terrible story. And yet, like, there's this narrative in the media that, he had a deathbed confession. I'm like, no, there's no deathbed. There's no deathbed confession. These guys never take full responsibility for their actions. They're really bad people. It's that's the only reason why I've been paying attention to the Nazis, to be honest, is it lightens up a little bit. Like the rest of my work is, these Catholic priests. I'm gonna, lighten things up with some Nazi coverage.
Well, just imagine, you have the district attorney, the mayor, the police chief, all going in there and confessing. At least, occasionally. You know what I mean? They're taking photo ops with these people. Just imagine what the dirt they got, man.
Yeah. I call the priesthood a sex cult, and I can stand by that 100%. There's a weird sex thing going on there. We talk about it in the podcast. But, okay, well, let's not talk about priests now, man. Let's get lighthearted again. Boneface.
Well, speaking of sex cult, this guy Hammer, the porn star, they're doing these blood rituals and this other kind of stuff, and occult tattoos and stuff. Almost.
Guess how many girls hang out with him?
Oh man,
how many girls? Zero. Right? Yeah. His wife left him. He can't have access to his kids. They have what we call incels, involuntary celibate. These guys are vol cells because, get this, they can only have sex with white women who are unvaccinated and pagan. And that really slims the dating pool right down to almost nil, right? So they're very misogynistic. He actually, for that march in Florida, there was supposed to be a women's auxiliary, but no women volunteered to help. The women were supposed to drive and cook for the men, but they didn't show up. So I don't think there's a lot of chicks in this cult.
Now, again, from my first glance of these people, it looked like they were stable kind of people with homes and jobs and things like that. They weren't like your typical Klan Nazi street people like you normally see, meth heads, and except for Boneface.
Well, and Hammer lives in a camper, like a trailer, right? Like a pull-behind on the piece of land with no plumbing, no water, no sewage, no electricity. I don't know how he's going to make it through the winter. I mean, Maine winters are quite tough, as you know, so you're not going to do well out in the woods in that thing. These guys, this is why they always cover with masks, Ed, because they know if they're exposed, they're going to lose that lifestyle of where they have a job, because this is the way our communities react to finding out someone's an actual neo-Nazi, someone that wants the extermination of the other. That's what they talk about. Don't let them fool you when they say, we're just organizing. No. In their chats and in their podcasts and in their live streams that I listen to, I hear it, right? I hear the warrior, right? I hear the warrior bragging. They're going to go to Ukraine, learn how to fight and get weapons and come back and use it in the race war. These guys have plans for some sort of white revolution. They always do. That's their end goal. So whatever they say when the reporter asks them, so, Mr. Hammer, how do you feel about the Jews? That's not really how they feel about the Jews, right? We know that. We can tell. But a lot of the media will just run with this like the both sidesism, right? It's like, here's Mr. Hitler. I'm like, I'm not going to call him Mr. Hitler. I'm not going to call him Mr. Hammer. I actually don't interview. I'll interview murderer priests. I've interviewed murderer priests. I've interviewed rapist priests. I've interviewed criminals of all shapes and sizes, of wacky people. I have constantly doing that, right? In 30 years, I will not go interview a Nazi. I do not talk to Nazis. I don't need to, right? Like they tell me enough by just carrying the swastika. They tell me enough by appearing on like Handsome Truth's podcast where they reveal that. So, like, no conversation with Nazis. It's just basic rule number one in the media. But unfortunately, mainstream news says, "Oh, we got to give both sides." I'm like, nah, not both sides of them. No thanks. That's why I'm not interviewing Boneface.
You know what's so scary too, man? Real quick is Hammer, Handsome Truth, Boneface, all these characters. These are like Twitter handles, or you know what I mean, or like
cartoons.
Right?
They're like cartoons.
Right. 20 years ago, you had to use your real name, but now just a Twitter handle, and you're considered like a legit person. It's so weird. Like,
well, look at the shaman, right? The QAnon shaman, right? It's like branding. They're branding themselves. It's like, oh, Hammer's selling merch. He's a grifter.
Well, you know what?
He's selling those flags.
Shaman in real life has like 6 real names. and Jelly, Chase Lee, he's one of those guys with 6 length names.
Right. Well, we know the names of these guys. We know the names of all the leaders. These are just their nicknames, right? This is their nicknames. The ones that I don't know are Cracker or Nate or there's another one like Goliath, right? They have these names within their group, but we know the leaders, and we know that their lives are ruined. We hear that, when they do a 3-hour-long podcast with a fellow Nazi, and they're drinking. Hammer drinks. He's also on steroids, right? So he's like, when he feels relaxed with a bro and he's talking to someone 3 hours into a podcast, he'll reveal that this is not an easy life. And I think that's the only thing that I take solace in, is knowing that these guys, they may act like, oh, this they got things going, but really they're losers. And these guys, all these guys at that party said this was the best weekend of their life.
Wow. But so Hammer and Handsome, are they employed? Any kind of income?
Well, Hammer does illegal tattoos and sells Nazi memorabilia. Handsome Truth has a weird scam going with live streaming, and people throw him money, but none of these guys are living in opulence, right? I mean, they're poverty stricken, rightly so. They have trouble getting on certain platforms. They're the public sentiment is out there. Like, for instance, Hammer was banned from Planet Fitness. I broke that story a couple months ago. The woman up here in Maine that spoke out in favor of Hammer and supposedly was like a bed and breakfast for Nazis, okay? And she wrote a letter to the local newspaper, and it's a newspaper that doesn't even have a web edition, right? It's like the local weekly, right? She wrote a letter to it, trying to explain the history of the swastika. And I'm like, no conversation about the history of the swastika.
So did Shaman. But listen, man, we're out of time.
Yes, sir.
Dude, you have an open invitation to come back and share whatever.
Right on.
Great stuff, man. I love it.
Great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
You got to bring the Lion Tamers, man. Okay, I'm not going to get away with it once. Crash_Barry on Twitter. CrashBarry.com. Patreon is the Crash program. And also called Crash Barry there, so you can find them there as well. All these great podcasts, different seasons. One about the Church Devils and Dirtbags, about the Bad Priest, Tough Island, Maine, and Disinfomaniacs pod with Andy O'Brien and Nathan Bernardi. They couldn't make it today. They were polishing up the clown car. But Crash Barry, man. Listen, my friend, thank you so much, okay?
Thank you. Had a great time.
Me too. Good night.